Who's here? Hi, everybody. Hey, AJ. It's funny, isn't it funny when you see a whole like 30 boxes or whatever, you're like, yeah, that's it.
Oh,
Darlene.
hi.
Barry. People, a lot of people, a dog or two. Oh, cool. Thanks for being here. Who else can I say hello to? Jennifer. Hi. Every time, I don't know, I'm sure people from the romper room, Jennifer, familiar with that, like magnifying glass. So those are in the chat. How funny. I see Michael Ashner and Kyle and Brian. Anyway, yeah, it's Catherine Woodman May there. Hi. I hope you're well.
Yeah, doing well.
Catherine's going to give a talk like this soon, right?
Yeah, like the second week in June, I think.
I think it's the 18th or something like that. It's on my to-do list to like finalize that in the next day or two. I'm sorry, I've been. Okay. All right. I may go through. No, not gonna do. Oh, I got a direct message. Hi, Charlie. Cool. Okay. So I really wanted to be here to thank everybody for the ways in which SAW has grown. Excuse me, over the year. Obviously the weird situation we're all in, but the gifts that it's given so many of us here. And I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that, but also give a little bit of a presentation, a little bit of a talk about some of my values and where I'm coming from, since I sort of created the place, but I'm actively trying to like let it be its own thing and let other people run it and let it run itself and sort of evolve organically and all that stuff. But nonetheless, my stamp is still on it. So for a lot of people, I mean, I've given this talk 3 or 4 times, maybe in person, but never online. And so like, I think it might have some value to it, especially to Michael Ashner, who I'm always trying to help in some way. Hi, Michael. You can tell me if this, all right. So I don't know, maybe I'll just launch on into it. Let me say, feel free to keep your mic on and ask a question in the middle. Is totally fine. I'm used to being interrupted. It doesn't happen enough these days, I think. And also I'll talk about anything SAW related or anything unSAW related afterwards. But I'm going to give this talk that's sort of set up for the first little batch of time. And I'm going to skip a lot of it because it's a long one that is worthwhile in other contexts. But in this context, I'm going to sort of breeze through some of them. So if it looks like I'm skipping some, I am. And you're welcome to say, hey, what was that part about? Or send me an email some other day or something. You know what? Some of the people at SAW, Barry may remember this conversation, said that when I do these talks, I should talk more about what's happening at the school soon. So, so what do we have happening at the school soon? If you don't know about the Graphic Novel Development Intensive, it starts June 1st. It's I can now say it's one of our premier programs. I think we have 2. That one is 6 months long. It lasts from June to November, and it's designed to get you making your graphic novel, whatever that is. We had a lot of success last year. Some of our alumni from there are here. We can put you in touch or whatever. Our year-long program, which runs from September to May, and then just sort of has some wiggle room at the end of May, is starting next September. And that I think we've had a lot of success in too. We also have some people still in that, although it's winding down, and we can put you in touch with that. And then there's a lot of little things happening soon. Josh Baer and Hyena Hell are going to come and do a Punk Comics 2 workshop soon. I think that's in June. Catherine is going to talk in June. We're going to have Mary Naomi talk in July. There's a lot of workshops being planned in July, including a graphic memoir one that's going to be 3 days I don't know much about that. That's Beth Tremblay and Emma Jensen are handling that. Barry hosts the Draw Jam every Thursday. It's unbelievable. Barry, thank you. It's been over a year now.
Yeah, I know. It's wonderful. Thank you for, letting me do that.
Sure. Michael has been hosting the Linda Barry nights on Wednesdays. Is that right? Wednesdays? That seems to be really great. I know some other things happen, like there's like things that happen on Tuesdays and Mondays. I'm so glad all this self-organization has happened. And anyway, so that's that. Okay, I am going to close my chat. Let's see. Oh, Beth's here. So Beth, did I get? Beth's definitely the one who's like, make sure you mention things. Did I mention anything or everything? I don't know. Oh, there's Beth. I'll just assume I did it and she doesn't chime in. Okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, so I hope I don't go on too long. You are totally welcome. Obviously, you're welcome to sign off, but you're also welcome to get on with it. But I sort of wanted to talk about, and I'm going to start sharing my screen in just a moment. And when I start sharing my screen, I won't be able to read your chats or anything. So I'll take a look at those afterwards. But I'm going to start sharing my screen and talk about there. And then we're going to go full screen on this thing. Do y'all see this character with a, yeah, okay. I want to say that it sounds hokey, but the big theme for me this year has been feelings. I'm just realizing how many feelings are involved with creating art. And one comes up when I show this slide, and that is, it's a quote. It says, "I have modified the harp, and it has modified me." It's this quote from Andreas Vollenweider. I don't expect anyone, except maybe some people slightly older and geekier than me, to know who he is. But for the longest time, I was so ashamed that I was like into Andreas Vollenweider, new age harpist who plays harp. And I love his music, and I always have. But I was like always hiding it, And now I did it for so long, and then finally, like I was like, hell with it. I'm going to put that quote I always liked up on this slide, and then I put it up on a slide, and no one knew what I was talking about. Like I'd been hiding in shame all these years, and like nobody knew what the hell I was worried about. So anyway, so this is a quote by this this new age harpist who plays this modified harp in the same way that John Cage modified his piano. There's a lot of ways he has modified it. I can't really speak to it, but he said this quote a million years ago, that the harp has also modified him. And to me, that really is the core of what's important to me as art, and why I've created art for so long. One last thing before I get started, I realized recently during the interview that Jessica Abel and I did together, that another source of shame has been that for years, I always chose art over money. And just year after year, I chose art over money. And I never had any. In my 20s, my 30s, my 40s. And now that I'm in my 50s, people are seeking me out a little because I've always chosen art over money. And they're like, how do you do that? How do you choose art over money? And I was like, it's hard. But it's also not that hard. And I don't know. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but it's another source of shame that like sort of had to realize was there. So I'm just going to well, I'm definitely going to have to meet somebody.
Yeah, I'm going to go.
There we go. We muted that person. So that said, going back again to feelings, in fact, that has been the main thing that comics have given me. So that's where we'll start. Oops. So here we go. This is all Peanuts from 1976, and some people may not realize how just like aggressive and wild and emotional. Oops, let me see if I get that right. Sorry guys, I'm just trying to adjust my screen so I can see it all. There we go. How emotional Peanuts was and Charlie Brown was, and this is 20 years after it started, or 23 years, but look at, there's arguing going on here, there's kicking, there's threatens to assault over here, there's biting one's own foot. It's just like all this like aggression, and all the emotions I think were really pretty much in Peanuts, but these are some that I picked out. And I picked out 1976 because that is a year I bought myself a Peanuts book that I still have. I bought it at one of those library sales. I would have been 7 years old, I guess. And it's really important that I wrote it, dedicated it to myself, because I sort of see it as the beginning of like having to do things for myself and having to stand up for myself in some ways. And so that's on the inside of the book, which I have in this house somewhere, but I didn't bring it out. And so I noticed over time that the things I was really drawn to in Peanuts were a few of the emotions in particular: exuberance, confusion, and anger. And here are some just examples of the exuberance, which you would see a lot in Snoopy. The confusion you would see a lot in Charlie Brown. And the anger, actually, this is a great page. It's got a little bit of all of them. That anger really well expressed there, and the confusion and the here, and the exuberance, of course, and the kite flying itself. Schultz would wrap all of that up into one strip. And that was me as a kid, exuberant and confused and frustrated, if not angry, that the world didn't offer me a place to be those other two things, or that other thing, exuberant mostly. I felt like at every point where the world doesn't let you express your exuberance, it confused and angered me, as it does Charlie Brown. Sometimes I have no idea what the next slide is, so I find out. And every once in a while I had to mute people. So in my own work, in the earliest stretches of it, looking at it in retrospect, 25 years later, I noticed those things: anger, confusion, and exuberance. And so lots of punching and, and yelling and arguing and things like that. Some anger, there's some exuberance. The exuberance is always somebody trying to be free, hoping for that little patch of mental space, to be free and to be who they are. And a lot of times that anger comes when they don't get it. Oh, look, there's not a confusion panel, but it's there too. And so what you just saw were some samplings from 91 to 93 or so. Hey, Rob Clow joined us. Hi, Rob. So as a craftsperson, I have to notice that this early work does not equal this work, just from a like, how does it express those emotions? How is those emotions that I'm so interested in getting across? And most of my conscious career has been spent trying to just like get better at drawing and the visual representation of those emotions, which were very, very, very difficult for me. My earliest work is really, really crude. And it's still crude, except maybe I've gotten a little better. And in fact, that's a sort of like little sort of mini trajectory, maybe going a few years at a time. This is about oh God, I don't want to bore you guys too much. 91, 94, about 2008, and that's about 2012 or something like that. So trying to get a hold of the medium better, trying to because I am dedicated to this medium, and like Andreas Vollenweider, it's helping me become me. I tried to honor it in the way it has served me. So I've tried to get better, frankly, is what I'm trying to say. I started out doing, to explore this like emotional world, I started out by doing fake autobiography. So this is a comic called Our Friend Tom. He's not really Tom, he's like a worse version of me. That'll come back. And it's just I'll let you, it's really gross. He's living in an alleyway. His ex-girlfriend comes and still feeds him, and he just gives bad advice to sort of like street rats that hang around. He's just a jerk. He's not really me. He's a fake version of me. At some point, I realized if I made that fake version of me, who was named Tom, if I actually make him a character that isn't me, that has a different name, I can make him more angry. I can make him more exuberant. I can those values that I have, whether subconscious or conscious, can really come out more. And so Hutch Owen, this character, was invented, and he was, again, angrier and more exuberant than I could be. And so once I clued into that, like, oh, I've invented a character now, and this is like the simplest stuff is inventing a character, but for me it was totally difficult. I thought I was a genius. I invented a character, but after that I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and so these are like dot matrix printouts of me trying to figure out who that character was and what his story was. This giant binder of just me trying to figure out what stuff was. That became this story, which came out in 1993. Can you mute yourself? I can't seem to mute you. Not everybody. I wonder if I have the ability to mute everybody. Okay, got that. All right, good. So anyway, that's the sort of short version of that story. There's all that pent up anger. It was a lot of arguing in that comic and a lot of dialogue. There he is, and he has died. He has succumbed to the system. The capitalist system has destroyed his attempt to sort of create, again, that sort of free space, this time literal free space out in this field. He has lost that battle. And I think there's a quick aside. Yeah, I'll mention this too. I didn't realize it at the time, but as I was finishing, right around the end, I realized, like, oh, I just recreated Star Wars. This character being the Ben Kenobi character, this character being the Darth Vader character, and this character being the Skywalker character. So there's this, it's just, once I realized that template was there, that's when I realized I had to kill a character off, because it seemed to work really well. There's this moment, and I think it's the key moment. I'm sort of writing my own comics review here because no one really picked up on this. It's okay, no big deal, because that's part of the theme of today's talk too, is like, you have the ability to be your own best reader, and you can create the comics for yourself, and over time it'll serve you as you begin to notice patterns and you begin to notice who you are, and you get to know yourself better by producing work over and over again. So there's this moment in that book where he hands the kid, Ben Kenobi, he hands the Luke Skywalker type kid this zine. It says everything I ever really needed to know I had to teach myself, which was a riff on the book about learning in kindergarten. And I realized it was really a riff on the first moment I gave in 7 years old, where I gave myself this book too. So I realized, like, already I was, life and art were repeating themselves a little bit. And I was beginning to see little repetitions and little themes. But I think, I'm not going to tell this whole Kodansha story, but I will say that they were very drawn. I approached in 1994 a Japanese publisher, Kodansha. They're huge. They're like the Random House of Japan. And they were looking for American artists for a year or two. And they were very drawn by Hutch Owen. They liked him a lot. The reason they liked him is because he was very emotional and expressive. And they made that clear. These faces are kind of some of the ones I think they would have responded to. I'll tell you this amusing story. They set up a booth in the San Diego Comic Con in 1994. I'm just checking to see if I have slides of that. No, I don't. And they would take a look at your comic, and they had a translator out front and like 2 or 3 editors in the back. And so I gave them my comic, And the translator took it back. The editors huddled and they just spoke, Japanese quietly to themselves. And then the translator comes back and they give you a sort of verdict. And the verdict was, they want to know more about this character. Like, what is his job? And I said, oh, well, he doesn't have a job. He's like a bum and he sort of hangs out in the alleyways. And so she goes back to the editors, and the editors, they sort of huddle together and they come back and she says, they say it's okay that he doesn't have a job. And I go, whew, okay, I made it one round. And then they say, they want to see more stories with this character. And I said, oh no, I kill him at the end. It's on page 53. This is where he dies. And she goes and she tells the editors, they huddle together again. And then she comes back and she says, whatever happens, this character must live. And I was like, whoa, that's great. And that became the first working with that actual publisher. We wound up having a relationship for a couple of years, again, because of that sort of emotional quality that the character had. But that's a whole nother story, which you can see. I'm going to ask someone else to mute if you can. I think it's Beverly or somebody, just because it's ambient noise. But we did some work, my friend John Lewis writing and myself, for this publisher, Kodansha. And all I've got is some screenshots from like 1999, so you can barely even see it. But that was an odd, interesting, fun project, which I'm happy to talk about. Real quick, I want to say that like when I finished that, I realized that the whole process of creating that comic was a one-way street. It was like I came up with the idea, and then I sort of like made the story, and then I like drew it. And I don't know if I have some sketches, I don't, but I like, I wrote it, and then I sort of thumbnailed and scripted it, and then I penciled it, and then I penciled it again, and then I inked it, and it never changed after that first sort of, the first time that the story idea was there. And that was, for me, eventually, I didn't realize it at the time, but eventually it was very frustrating. And instead, with the next project, I started asking, what would it be like if you did a story that was more about tone? What if it was loud for a while and then quiet for a while? What if it was like a certain section was all captions and a certain section wasn't? What if there were characters, but they only were in there for a couple panels and then they moved off screen and stuff like that, or off stage, whatever you want to call it. And so I did this comic, which is called New Hat. And it starts off, like I said, loud for about 9 pages or something. It's just this guy, he's tied to a stake, and all these sort of like cave people are about to club him to death. And he just has this like long, loud rant before they club him to death. I even, in this section here, I even made up words. Like they were Latin based, they were almost words, but and I just thought this was the greatest thing. And I had a lot of fun. To me, the comic was way more interesting than the comic where I came up with an idea first and then I did the idea. This was a lot more fun because it was playful. So there he is getting clobbered to death in that panel. And then it sort of cuts off to this quiet section where this guy is drawing a name in the sand and some other things happen. And so that was really, there's some of the caption-based sections. So it was more about like putting things in contrast with each other, sections in contrast with each other. And that was a two-way street. When I finished that, I was like, that's how it needs to be. It's like this give and take between the comic, the creation of the comic and me, right? Like I want to learn things as I'm creating it. I want to have new experiences while I'm creating it. And I didn't during that Hacho in that first book. I just like was either frustrated or it was going well. There was nothing else. There were no surprises. There were no sort of magical moments of synchronicity and other things like that. Whereas the creation of this comic had a lot of that. And so that's what I wanted to follow from then on in. And over the next bunch of years, I made up lots of new stories and lots of new characters and published them and blah, blah, blah. Not in a bad way, blah, 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 but in an okay way. I tried different things. This one I tried to do lots and lots of improvisations based on what I thought improvisations were. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I tried. We could talk more about that later. Now I'm going to start to skip a little. So at some point I realized I was starting to collect all these ideas onto note cards and into notebooks and things like that. And I realized that all my books, like I had tons of these ideas, like just everywhere, scattered everywhere. And I realized like every time I had a book, missing my PowerPoint, sorry. Like I realized like all these ideas, some of them were better when they were Hachoan ideas. Even though I killed that character, I was like, oh, see that? Okay, there it goes, magic, okay. So I went back to that character that I killed. I did a bunch of other stories with him. We can call them prequels or whatever. So I spent 3 years on that character. So this was a time period of sort of exploring ideas, a little less than emotion, but it's still there. For instance, in 2001, I was living in New York City, where the 9/11 attacks happened, and that was a very emotional time for all of us in New York, I think. But there was never a time where I wasn't making a comic about something that was going on, rarely literal. And so in this case, I didn't know what to write about. So I just started with something that just seemed absolutely ludicrous, but also possible, which was this sort of Darth Vader capitalist person I mentioned before, sort of chipping golf balls off a neighboring tower into the wreckage. And that's how I just started this sort of improvisational comic about what we were all experiencing. It wasn't a great comic, I don't think. It was okay. But the important thing is that it was still exploring that confusion that we were all having. A little bit of anger in there. Exuberance a lot of times came out in that character, who's even having this like weird exuberant time because he's a disgusting jerk. But there was still a little bit of that exuberance that wanted to express itself, and that I sort of like needed to let out in some way. And so that was that story. So that more about that character, the early 2000s. So I realized like all these stories that I was having, or all these ideas I was having, I'm sorry, like I would take 2 or 3 of them and sort of combine them and then make a story out of them. And that was leaving all these other stories behind, all these other ideas behind rather. And then I remembered that I had loved comic strips early on, particularly Peanuts. And I'm going to skip through this really quickly, but it made me realize that I should try comic strips. And the way I tried comic strips, because I thought it was a dead medium, I couldn't figure it out. I disliked it. The only good comic in the newspaper for a long time was Calvin and Hobbes, according to me. But I knew somebody, Shannon Garrity is her name. She was a web cartoonist in the early 2000s. She's very, 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 very funny. So I asked her to write some things. And we came up with this plot, and we wrote the plot together, and she handed me a strip one a day for about 9 months. And we just did this thing called Trunk Town. And that was really fun. And that was just a way for me to sort of learn the medium again, or to learn that particular form, the 4 panels, from someone who I considered a master. She's really funny at it. And so after working with Shannon on this to get better, I sort of took the training wheels off and launched my continuing character as a 4-panel strip for a long time, about 3 years, I think. And that was daily in just on the web for a year, and then in newspapers in Boston and New York for a year or 2. And by this point, this was the most fun I ever had doing comics. Like it was the most fun I had getting up in the morning and doing one was when I was working on these, because the ideas would come. I would sort of honor those ideas for a week and then like have new ideas for the next week and stuff like that. And it just was lighthearted. They were often superficial, which sometimes disappointed me, but in general, I had a lot of fun with this. And I did tons of them, which I still need to collect someday. I did there were some just wild ideas that came out. My cartooning got better, everything. When I had those short deadlines, that daily deadline really just helped me get better and sort of not second guess a lot of ideas, just sort of like hit them fast and honor them. I'd see myself repeating Peanuts often. I'd be like, oh, that was in a Peanuts cartoon. That kind of thing happened. I redrew his death scene again, just because I could. There's always a better cartoonist, so there's a better version of a bulldozer. I can't remember. Oh, I see where we're going with this. At some point, what I was trying to do in that last year of building the Hutch Owen comic strip is I was trying to sell it. I was trying to sell it to the big syndicates. That's the name of the what they call the companies that run the newspapers, or that sell comic strips in the newspapers. And the funny thing is the head of one of those syndicates was one of my best friends. His name's Brendan. And so I would write him or talk to him or whatever, excuse me. And I'd say, Brendan, you need my strip. Why aren't you buying my strip? And he'd be like, oh, it's just like, you can't, it's too edgy. It's too political. I asked another syndicate, there's only 3 or 4 of them. Like, this is a good strip. You guys should run this. This is a really good daily strip. And they're like, it's like 1963 out there. We can't sell something like this. And so it didn't sell. And that's fine. But I realized that whole time while trying to sell the strip, me and Hutch Owen, that's the character there, we were like the same creature. We were the same person. He, in the story of the strip, was trying to get people to come to his new country. He had invented this country. They were seceding from America. They'd had enough. God, this was in 2006 or 7 or something, way before things got really bad. And he couldn't convince anyone to come over and join his side. He had like 3 or 4 stragglers, and they would just sort of sit around a campfire. But it was really a great moment to realize, like, oh, this is me and Hutch we're just doing the same thing, just in different places. I'm doing it in a real city, and with emails and visits to offices and drawing my comic, and he's doing it on the page, and we were just trying over and over again. And again, it was that he's exuberant. He doesn't know why people won't come to the new country, and his anger sometimes comes out, but it mostly was those 2 first things. The funny epilogue to that story, is that after Hutch Owen got canceled out of the New York and Boston papers, I thought, okay, that's enough comic strips. Boy, those things take the life out of you. And then maybe 2 days later, I called my friend Margot, who is half Palestinian. And I said, Margot, what the world needs now is a family-friendly Arab American comic strip. And she was like, you're crazy. And get off my phone, or whatever. But then 2 days later, I sort of won her over, and she was like, okay, let's try it. And what I wanted to do was base a comic sort of on her family growing up and just run with it. I'd spent 3 or 4 years like learning comic strips and getting what I think good at it. And the important thing about those years was like honoring ideas quickly, of combining ideas that don't seem to go together, combining them for humor or for story ideas. And so we did it. We sat down, we came up with 2 weeks of strips, and I brought it to that same guy, Brendan. And he said, okay, give me 2 more weeks of strips and we'll sign some contracts. So it was that easy. It was that easy to get. I just had to have the right idea to get a contract, right, with these big syndicates that I'd been knocking my head against for 3 years. So Margot and I did that for about 9 months, something like that. The problem there is that the economy collapsed soon after we started. And in fact, so the people selling the strip would bring it around to the newspapers, and they'd say, do you want to buy this crazy looking strip about Arab Americans? And they said, are you crazy? We are going out of business. And can we pay less for Blondie? Because we're paying too much for Blondie and Hagar the Horrible and stuff like that. So, so that wound up getting canceled. Bummer. So then I was finally done with comic strips. Although I still had all these ideas, and we'll get back to that. At some point, I realized that Ali, the main character I was connected with in that comic strip, and Hutch were very, 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 very similar. He also was exuberant. Look, he's at his restaurant, but he wants to play. He wants to play the darbuka and the mizmar. He's crying because people don't understand his food. He was really that same character, trying to convince people of his he's trying to win him over with his passions. It didn't work. So in 2009, became a dad. That is Rosalie. And the first 2 weeks were so intense. All I could do was like scribble in my notebook some of the sort of like things I was feeling and dreaming, and the I'd gotten pretty okay at like inventing scenarios that would let me explore those same sort of emotional experiences I was talking about. And so lots and lots of scribbling would happen, but that's all I would be able to manage in that time period because I was so busy otherwise. And I just felt like this person, tired, haggard, proud when he could get his baby swaddled, and also just in this like endless slog through the wilderness of trying to keep this baby. And eventually I sort of wrote a bunch of like what I called bits, and sort of cobbled them together into a story that didn't get drawn until 2011, but it got written in this sort of style here, and it sort of had it ready. I did draw, I think, 2 or 3 pages of it to have ready as a pitch. I never got around really to pitching it very much though. So there is the character. His whole story is he's just trying to deal with his own needs. All he wants to do in this section is go to the bathroom, but dealing with an infant is so tough that he can't even manage to do that. And then he doesn't know really the best way to serve her milk and other things. And there's some other things that happen in the story. The big symbol is that he wants waffles. So that's what that story wound up being. So I'll go through this really quickly, not to bum people out too much. A lot of you know, some of you may not know, Rosalie didn't live past her 2nd birthday, and this is the last photo that we had together. And I am going to go through this really fast, but I'll get to the parts about craft and emotion and story as quickly as I can. I'm going to skip through those. Okay. This is me trying to deal with the sort of tragedy of losing her. It was so instant and so shocking that I reverted to what I did in that first time that first big creative episode of mine. I just wrote tons and tons and tons of writing, little pictures here and there. By now, writing and drawing was the thing that I did. Let me remind you that I always chose art over money, and I was never very successful at it from a commercial standpoint, but I sure as heck did a lot of it. And it always helped me, and it always fueled me, and it helped my growth, and it helped my self-awareness and things like that. But I was surprised to see myself reverting almost entirely to words when this happened. And it was similar to that time period where I was writing in 1994, that Hutch Owen story. Now I was using Google Docs instead of a dot matrix printer. But I, again, kept this huge binder of notes and other images. And I had a cell phone camera or digital camera or something by then, and wound up taking lots of photos as just trying to sort of cope and pace around the neighborhood. And we went on this big travel log, or this big couple of journeys to get out of town. And again, in other times, I give a longer talk about this particular process. And I think I'll probably do it in the memoir workshop that's coming up in July. But suffice to say that this book was a journey. It was about a journey. The creating it was a way of helping myself get to the place that I needed to get to, spiritually and psychically and physically. Because I knew what had to be accepted. just couldn't I couldn't accept it. So that eventually became, I wrote intensely like that for about 5 weeks. And then I started to craft it as a comic again, because that's what I'd always done. And so I spent 3 years drawing that story, that journey of those 5 weeks, sort of living it, re-experiencing it, even down to the smallest movements, like reenacting the walking, taking photographs of it, and then trying to recreate it in images. And again, it's trying to keep that circuit is probably a better word, of writing and drawing and real feelings and my own life experience, and how one affects the other, and the act of drawing, and the act of telling the story, and the act of the comic creating. We don't even have a good word for sequential art making. So sad. But that became this important, deeply important part of my healing, for lack of a better word. I guess that is the word. And so that story became this, page after page after page. Again, 3 years of trying to just sort of sort through that first 5 weeks and sort of relive it, because a lot happened in those 5 weeks. A lot. So, and again, I guess I'll talk about this in the memoir workshop in July, I guess. I realized, no, I'm gonna skip that part, but I'm gonna go to here. Yeah, I realized I was still working in those same modes. I was still exploring those same 3 emotions: anger, confusion, and exuberance. There wasn't a lot of anger in it, to be honest. The book was almost entirely confusion, and trying to sort of sew things back together out of the confusion. But there was also exuberance, and I didn't realize it going in. In fact, it wasn't until after I finished this book that I even came to all these conclusions about those 3 things. But it was the depiction of Rosalie, of my daughter, throughout the book, that was this exuberant force in the book. And just like most of my other books, it was like the main positive quality, I think, frankly, was that exuberant, that life force that just was sort of undeniable. And again, if I'm going to be for a moment my own critic and reader, like, that's always, I think, been the best thing about my work, is when the exuberant parts of it can be sort of straightforward and left alone. And so having that child in that book was really important. So I'm going to finish by talking about longevity. Early teacher of mine, watercolor teacher, I asked him about, I don't know, I was frustrated with something, and he just answered, I don't even remember the question I asked, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to, and he just answered with, like, just shoot for longevity. And I think I can finally look back and say that I have had longevity, but it's not, longevity in itself isn't the value. The value is the self-awareness and the ability to grow based on the repetition of themes, based on your sort of conquering goals, sometimes even just understanding what your goals are, or even understanding what the obstacles are constantly. Like, I think we are often we're often sort of battling the same things in ourselves over and over again, and that's okay. if we can get incrementally better at it, then I think we're doing the right thing. And so that's what longevity has given me, is I've realized like, oh, okay, I am getting, I believe anyway, slightly better at some of these battles, these personal battles. And sometimes that battle is just expressing myself or trying to understand myself. I think anytime, I try not to let that get too solipsistic or narcissistic, but because I think that self-awareness hopefully becomes an asset in trying to understand and empathize and be with others. So that said, this last section is about longevity and repetition. And so for those of you who have seen this series of stories I've been doing, Bee is Dying, it's just this ridiculous, crazy thing full of what I hope is a funny kind of anger about this guy mostly lying on his back, at least for the first 20 some pages, dying. And I want to go, there we go. So there's a sample of it. He is on his back dying, but giving this huge speech over and over again. I think there's 22 or 24 of these or something. And there's that anger and exuberance here. There's not much confusion. There's so much self-assertion in these strips. There's not much of that confusion. The confusion comes in the later books. But when I want to talk about longevity, I realized I drew the same thing 26 years ago. I didn't even realize it until like I was maybe halfway through these series. This character here was drawn in 1994. He is strapped to a pole and all these cavemen or whatever are going to clobber him to death. But he's getting one last speech out. This is the same thing. It's the same thing. And it's so funny. And when you have a revelation like that, it just gives you something to think about at night, instead of being on your phone, you can give some thought as to why you keep repeating yourself. I find it pretty interesting. So there's some examples from that, but it keeps going. 29 years ago, I think this is the earliest one, I drew a comic about a fake son. I was far before I ever became a parent, but I was imagined having a son that I would call Snufkin after the Moomin Troll character. But I would talk over him constantly. I didn't let him express himself. He's not in the same way that I've always sort of like fought against the forces that keep you from being exuberant. I am that force in this comic. I am the force that keeps him from being exuberant. And I think some of the same things at play in the latest issue that I've been doing with B. He's got this daughter, kind of based on my real daughter and kind of not, but he's talking over her constantly. And I don't think she's, to be honest, I don't even know if she's spoken at all this issue, but I don't think she has. It's the same thing. He is just overbearing. He has too much to say. And her experience, this is very heavily affected by the pandemic. So her experience is already not a great one. And here's Molly Rose. Molly Rose, you want to come see? I'm talking about, look, this comic might look familiar. Do you want to see? You got to hurry because I was about to turn the page. You want to come in? Can they see? They can't see you. There you are. I was talking about this comic. Never mind. All right. Sorry, gang. Let me go. I'm going to turn one screen over and then close that door. Oops, why is it going? There we go. Thanks. It continues. Like I wound up doing when I was doing book 2, I realized I was repeating myself from The Sands. The Sands was a book I did in 1997 to 8 or something. I'm not going to go into too much detail about all this stuff because it's not that important to anyone but me. But that story is a lot about a woman who has a lot to do. She has her own thing going on, and the guy is sort of lost and in his he's sort of in this environment he doesn't understand. He talks a lot. Same thing. It's the same relationship. I just think this is hilarious. 21 years ago, this book called Banks, You Banks. Again, another guy talking way too much. But in this instance, he's talking about himself. He's letting her know who he is. And the same thing happens here. He's just talking about it. He's telling her who he is, like, which is just annoying. I only do this on comics. And by the way, I hope I will not. I'll cut this short so I don't do it too much in real life. Even some of the images repeat themselves. This was a Hutch Owen strip from 12 years ago. When I did Daddy Lightning, there was this other force of the mothers in the story that he couldn't live up to. And that creeped into a story I did just a few weeks ago. And I kind of realized it, kind of didn't realize it at first. I was like, oh yeah, those are that's the same thing, is this force that he is trying to live up to, but he cannot mother properly, frankly, is what in one way to put it. So it just takes me back to those days in 1976, and when my sort of heart was just opening to the idea of emotion and navigating. Let's zoom in. There we go. And navigating the world of feeling and trying to understand the adult world, which even at 52, I'm still trying to understand or whatever. And just trying to sort of like use comics to understand it, and comics sort of affects me, and as I create them, it creates me. That's that Andreas Vollenweider quote, I've modified the harp, and it has modified me. So that's where I came from. And then somewhere down the line, I started a school, and you're all here, at least through that portal in some way. I'm going to really fast show you. Yeah, that's what it looked like back in 2010, by the way. So we've come a long way. Now we're online. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Cool. And see how many people are still here. Cool. Okay, I said way too much. I'm honored if anyone's got anything they want to talk about or ask. It doesn't even have to be to me. If you see somebody like in a square and you want to like have a breakout room with them or something, it's fine. Otherwise, I'm happy to take questions. Now I can look in the chat window if somebody wants me to, if somebody thinks I should. I see Rob talked about The Fly. Anyway, so thanks all for just like letting me sort of tell my story. I really, like I said earlier, the theme of like, what are the feelings we're sorting through as we draw, as we write and draw these stories? I think it's really important. It's the main one I've been sort of looking at this year, and so I hope this helps and is interesting. Somebody ask a question.
Hey, Tom.
Oh yeah. Hey, Brian. Hi.
Hi. I actually have a question about when you talked about you had that incredible meeting with the Japanese publishers, and you were localizing your comic. The reason I ask is there's some opportunity where I work, we're trying to introduce some comic concepts for job aids and stuff like that. And a lot of our courses are localized for Russian and Chinese and such. How hard was it to, because we read from left to right, and it's the other way around for them. So how hard was it to accommodate the language to your cartoon panels?
Oh, the real problem was not understanding what kind of stories they wanted. And this was like 1995 and 6, I think. So it was after Lone Wolf and Cub and Kamui and some other manga, but it was not before the manga explosion, where a sort of like where it became very internalized how to tell a manga story. We had no idea. They gave us feedback. We pitched them a 12-page story, 32-page story, and it'd have some digressions, and it'd have like two things going on at once, and they gave us feedback that we just could not comprehend. They're like, when you, like, we had one story like that, there was like, I can't even remember, I'm sorry. But there was like some things happening in this pond, and then some things happening in this house. And the main character, who was based on Hutch, was called Pitch. And they said, when the stuff happens in the house, we should see Pitch looking through a window. And we're like, he's like 20 miles away. He can't be looking in the window. But that didn't matter. What they wanted was to follow the character throughout the entire story. So that took us a while. And then they would give us feedback like, this should be more like the love story of a poet. And we were like, what does that mean? And this all came through translation and via fax. So like we'd get this fax and we'd be like, it was not easy to like call up our translator and say, can you find out what the heck they mean? Everything was slow. And we were not that receptive. We were not that good at saying, oh, we can give them what they want. Because, you know, again, we really didn't know what they want. And we were not that nimble of, you know, creators. John, my writing partner at the time, he eventually bowed out of that, and then I took it on and I did it for 1 or 2 more episodes or something, and then they just never renewed our contract or something. But it was a really fun experience. But that was the hardship, was really understanding 2 totally different storytelling styles and 2 completely different audience expectations.
Ah, cool. Thank you.
Sure. Charlie's asking me a question. Oh, Rob's holding the yellow hand or whatever. Rob, go ahead. Thanks.
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah, totally.
Cool. So the one thing I noticed you didn't talk about much, and I understand for the purposes of this particular topic, was I always think of you as a person who, beyond being interested in formal experimentation, you're someone who really has enjoyed collaborations in that kind of experimentation. How much of that, especially early in your career, impacted what you did as an artist? And then how much of like your particular age cohort of cartoonists, how did they influence your development?
Okay, how has collaboration influenced my development, and how is my age of my cohorts? Yeah. I don't know. I've always been, I've always thought I was not an outlier, but I've always loved collaboration. I've always been surprised. Again, you know that I come from a slightly older period of time where like your average cartoonist was a loner, you know, and they were kind of defiant about being a loner, you know, and that was this sort of general like archetype. And I wasn't that. I actually sought out collaboration a lot, and I sought out, you know, games of chance and things that would like give me surprises. And I collaborated a lot with Shane and Garrity and with Margot, and there's probably some others. And not just writing. Like with Margot, we would both come up with ideas. I would, more often than not, I would script. She would pencil. I would ink. She would color. It was like back and forth constantly. And so, so I don't know. I've just always I don't trust myself to have the best ideas or to deliver the best concept or execution or anything. What I really want is to be sort of alive as a creator, and it seems like accepting other people's input is a really good way to do that. And formal constraints are the same way. You know, the formal constraints give you these things to respond to, so you don't have to invent. You don't have to like invent whole cloth, and you don't have to be believing in your own willpower, you know, that your expression is so powerful that it needs to be unadulterated. And as far as my peer group, yeah, I mean, I have my favorites from when I lived in Seattle in the 90s. We affected each other deeply in that first 3 or 4 years. We all worked together, and we had this like art comics student group together. And even then it seemed weird to some people. Like we'd get together and talk about our stories. Other people got together and drank beers and did jams, and we would like actually like read each other's stories and give feedback and stuff. And I remember people thinking that was just the strangest, worst thing ever. People would come to our meetings and they'd be like, I'm never going to one of those again.
But serious.
Yeah, that's serious. Yeah, I can tell you more about that some other day. But I've lost touch with, I mean, I haven't lost touch with most of those people, but I am some of them aren't drawing that much, and the others we just sort of doing our thing. And but they affected me greatly. Like actually, seeing John Lewis's True Swamp 2 was a major revelation for me, because it was mostly talking. The comic was mostly talking, and it was like the characters go from one place, they go to another place and meet a new character, and they do a bunch of talking, and then they go to another place, and there's a climax. Like I was like, that's a story, wow. And that gave me the confidence to do Hachon, which is mostly talking. I joke that there's like 3 panels of plot in it. It's just probably about right. It's other than that, it's just talking. I hope that answers. Does that help? Okay, we'll get together sometime. We can blab about anything else, but I don't for a longer time. Nice to see you, Rob.
Tom,
sure. Hi,
sorry.
Kat. No, go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit more about the founding of SAW and where it's going and stuff? I'm curious.
I'll try and do the short version, which is that, so I taught at the School of Visual Arts for 10 years, maybe almost 10, maybe 9, something like that, 2001 to 2011 or something. And I couldn't afford New York anymore. So me and Leela had a lot of friends in Gainesville, Florida. I loved it. I thought it was a very arty place. It was a place where you can be an up and coming artist. And I've always been pretty inventive and a little bit type A, but I'm also kind of a follower at the same time. So like if James Sturm didn't invent CCS, I might not have invented SAW, I'm not sure. But I said like, okay, well, I'm just going to start my own school. I also don't have any qualifications that would get anybody to be like, oh, I'll look for a job in this other town. So I just started this school. And so that would have been about 2012. We took our first sort of cohort of people for a year-long program. I felt that things were just opening up, where comics was just becoming popularized enough that more people were seeking to learn it and to learn it as a really dedicated art form, and that having an informal rather than a university level, having an informal program in it could survive. And it survived barely. And it worked, I think it worked really well. We had ups and downs, but mostly ups from 2011, I would say, through the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, we moved entirely online. I moved away from Gainesville. And I think in a lot of ways, we're really, things are sort of better than ever. We've reached all of you people. And it's wonderful. We've had events. I see AJ up in my corner, and AJ was part of our reading event. And one of our Gainesville students, of course. Hey, AJ. AJ, I'll come to Colorado and we'll say hi again. Okay, good. But the pandemic gave us, with a lot of other communities online, it gave us a chance to really expand and to reach new people. And I'm just trying my best in one way. One reason I wanted to have this call today was to just really reach out to everybody who maybe is new from the past year and who doesn't know much about the sort of values of the school, or maybe who just wants to sort of communicate about them. I just wanted to talk about them and give my gratitude for all the energy that's come back to us this year. So Catherine, I don't know if that answers your question. It's vague. It does? Okay. What we're trying to do now, the truth is what we're trying to do now is stay a large comics making community and serve people and give people what they want. But that's proving to be more than I expected. It's hard. It's hard to have the systems in place to respond to things. So when things build up, or when they bubble up, I should say, like the Draw Jam and some of the other things that have just sort of like evolved on their own in the comics community here, that's been great. But we're also trying to serve in other ways, and sometimes that involves inventing things that sort of maybe might flop, but also bringing, I don't know, it's hard. but it's been, you know, it's been my, along with trying to parent Molly Rose in a pandemic, it's been my main, the main thing occupying my time and energy for the past year has been keeping the community helpful. I hope that helps. Does that help? Okay, cool. Thanks for being here, Catherine, by the way. All right, so I'll take any other question. There's so many on the chat, and Charlie's got one. I can answer Charlie. She says, are there any comic genres that you would like to create in that you haven't yet? Yeah, I think I'm gonna go to my grave not creating anything in any genre ever, Charlie. I don't think I'm drawn to genre, and I can't, and my visual chops are too limited. But hardly a day goes by that I don't think that I should, that I want to write a play. I really want to write a play. And I'll get to that. I see Paula here. Hi, Paula. I see Mariah. So some of you people who are asking questions in the chat, I'll try and get to it. But if you want to just ask it on the microphone, that's too. So I'll go to Paula. I'm seeing, in terms of telling the same story over and over, or seeing it, pushing out of different stories over and over, do you feel like you get something out of it every time? Does it change, or does it just need to happen? For context, I'm wondering why every story I have turns into the same story, she says. I don't see Paula on the screen, but I'm glad you're here. I get something new out of it every time. Yeah, I feel like, you know, I just feel like I'm addressing the same life issues, hopefully with a better mind, you know, and better tools. That those tools are largely comics, but it's also the mind that works on things and thinks about things. So I think I think I do those. Does that answer your question, Paula? When I notice that kind of repetition happening and those kinds of patterns happening, I definitely let them come. I've never forced one. When I see them starting to come, I try not to look at it too closely. I'm like, this seems like exactly like that other thing. So I won't reread that book anytime sooner. But the feelings also repeat too. And I see like, oh, the feelings are similar, you know, and you just hope you're getting better at stuff. You hope you're getting better at navigating your own life. You hope you're getting better at navigating the world. And more often than not, I think I am. So I hope that answers the question. Somebody's saying, what's the Draw Jam? The Draw Jam is Thursday nights. Barry can answer that in the chat if he hasn't already. Barry, can you post a link to the Draw Jam in the chat? Oh, yeah. Dante, yeah. Oh, you already did that. I'm sorry. See, I'm so high up in the chat. I'm missing other people. Oh, Sean says something about my 24-hour comics. Thank you, Sean. That's really nice. Jen, do you have a question? You raise your hand.
I do. It's something I was thinking about. Hey. Welcome. Hi from Brooklyn. So it's something I was thinking about as I've been stumbling through the snakes course. And I've been thinking about how, like, I mean, I'm grateful to, oops, you can't see me. I'm grateful to Barry for the Draw Jam and to, you know, all of the online support, because I'd have to say, like, the Draw Jam and the Saw stuff has really got me through the past year. And I mean, my first introduction was, my God, a year ago in February when I came for the memoir course. And what is the future going to be of online Saw offerings? Because I'd really like to do more, but can't necessarily at this moment because pandemic teaching. And I might be tied to New York City. So are you going to have online offerings, but like snakes, but maybe with like direct class teacher interaction, like an actual course? Well, you know what I mean.
I do, and the short answer is yes, definitely. The longer answer, which is only a tiny bit longer, is we're doing our best just to listen to people like yourself who are saying I could use this. Beth is in charge. I don't know, she's not really in charge, but you may be if you wish, Beth. But I know you're busy. But Beth's good at listening, and that's why I'm saying that. What would you like, Jen? Like something that's like 1 session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions, because we really are trying to figure it out. And I think we're just going to offer.
I like long. I'll be honest. Like the thing that I've enjoyed about the continuing ed classes at SVA, because that's actually how I found out about SAW originally. Because one of the women, I wish I could remember my name, or her name rather, my name. She had talked about going down to do the year-long course, and I would love something that's like that, that's intensive, that's online. I know that you have stuff going forward, and it's just like, unfortunately, timing isn't quite right for me to step into that at the moment. But you know, when I eventually get to the point, maybe by the fall, of developing the memoir comic, you know, I would love to be able to do that within SAW and have that feedback and that camaraderie and all of that, because I really like the way that SAW runs. You know, it's a great family. That's what it feels like.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. I think one thing we're going to work on doing, Barry's been hearing it a little bit, is try to offer little mentoring groups now and then, and bring in professionals from outside our little unit of 5 or 6 that we have here, and offer sort of mentoring pop-up groups that maybe last 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that. And that might serve you, because it sounds like you've gotten something developed, and you just need some feedback and accountability and things like that, and with a little bit of structure. I mean, all of these, anybody we hire for that would be capable of some exercises and some real direction to. So that might be one thing. Also within memoir is such a popular genre and such a stalwart for us that I think we may do different sorts of pop-up things now and then, memoir-based anyway. And we are doing the 3-day memoir workshop, but that's at the end of July. I see Beth nodding down there. And it's going to be in some ways similar to the one that was last February. I can't believe that was just barely a year ago. I mean, it seems like 17 years ago. So there's that might be happening. Is late July good for you, Jen?
Possibly.
Keep in touch.
Stuff. I mean, you know, pandemic things are still shaking.
Yeah.
Depends how school goes. What was I? Oh, darn it! I did have a question, but go on with what you were saying.
Okay. I'll take another question. I'm going to answer one that's in the chat, and then anybody who's got one that wants to come on mic, please go ahead. Mariah is asking, I wonder if you would consider hosting a conference post-pandemic. Many of us would be eager to meet each other in person, brainstorm, learn together in person, like the old days. Yeah, we'll definitely do some things at SAW in Gainesville soon. Definitely October. So definitely stay tuned for that. I don't know if we'd call it a conference. Conference maybe just sounds like it would be like, you know, 100 people, but this might be more like 20. But again, keep in touch, stay in touch. And sometimes the important thing for the community going forward for me is that we provide the resources to make things happen that people want to have happen sometimes. So if enough people are like, no, we want a conference, we want a conference, then we'll figure out how to make that happen. But I do know that we do plan on having some, week-long workshops and weekend workshops in Gainesville, probably starting in October. Emma is really in charge of that, but we're all in contact.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for tonight. It's really interesting.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Sure, Mariah. I really want to read your book, by the way. I mean, the book you've already done.
Great.
So I'll look for it, right? It's about swimming.
I've written several, actually.
Oh, put them in the chat
yeah.
and we'll.
I will.
Okay.
Thanks.
For being here. Okay, I thought I saw another hand. Feel free to just chime in. Jen, you got another question?
No, I just remembered the other one.
Okay.
It was, you said course, like an independent study type of thing, like what I think you used to teach it over at SVA, weren't you? Did you teach it with Matt?
Yeah, we taught it. We co-taught an independent study. I think the mentoring groups, if we do that, will be a lot like that. Yeah, you bring in a project. It's just some intensive feedback, some intensive guidance for a few sessions. Yeah, I think we'll do something like that pretty soon. Maybe sooner rather than later. Maybe not before August, maybe, but then after that. So, okay, cool. Yeah. Jim Hamilton, you have a question. You guys can really just unmute and
yeah, I was wondering, so the course that starts in June, the graphic novel course, goes through November. Is that something that's offered multiple times during the year? I mean, will you pick up again and do a December to May, or what's, is it typically something that starts in June, goes to November, and that's the typical time frame for it?
Yeah, if I have anything to say about it, it's only going to be once a year from June to November.
Okay.
Every once in a while, people clamor for something. I'm like, okay, we'll do it. Well, I don't expect that to happen because our resources are just that I don't think we could do it twice a year.
Yeah, honestly, I was wondering about the schedule. It's not, and it's just that my timing right now means starting, June 1st, which is really soon, is probably a little soon for me, but waiting another calendar year, I kind of, wonder about as well. So anyway, that's the thinking that I had. And, I'm trying to push myself to do some drawings now and kind of think some things out on my own. And I feel like I need a little more preparation before I'm ready and would benefit from a class.
Maybe you're ready. Michael's saying you're ready. Feel free to reach out if you want to talk about that a little more via email or something.
But is there space in the June class?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
A little bit. Yeah, it's getting close to full, but yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, Tom, can I ask you a question?
Barry, sure. I'm missing tons in the chat window, by the way. So yeah.
So you have been incredibly generous and flexible with allowing people to sort of like use SAW as a like umbrella for things that they want to create that are even beyond comics. Like Dante has made like a Friday meetup during the day, and Adrian gave it's like a brief workshop on internet comics, and Beth has put together a number of things, and there's been some compilations, like some anthologies that like Michael put together and Michael's Wednesday night. How do you let go like that?
Well, it's kind of like Rob was saying about collaboration, who am I? I'm just like one lousy little person, if I've gathered some resources, best thing I can do is share them. So is that what you mean? Like, how do you let go? How do you let other people sort of do things?
And I guess it would be the same with collaborating with your comic. How do you let go of the comic that you want to make and allow it to be that and the comic that other people want to make?
I don't know. I just don't believe any person has all the answers. And once you can get your head around that, letting everything else happen isn't so hard. Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
I'm trying. I want to just be able
I don't
to
have,
relate to
I don't have control issues. Like, it just seems kind of hopeless to try for too much control. And especially now, like something like Saw, no, but something like my own comic, yeah, like my own comics for me, it's more so than ever. But even still, I don't have so much like belief in my own ideas that I think I know what needs to happen in them. I sort of let that sort of come. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? I really appreciate you feeding my ego in that way, Barry. That's not necessary, but All right, let's see if anybody else has a real question. Not a real question. I mean, let's see if somebody has a I don't know. Let's see. Oh, Mariah posted her books. Thank you, Mariah. I really appreciate it. And Dante, yeah, you should come down in whenever to Gainesville. Hello, a conference. All right, we want a conference. If I'm missing questions, just somebody. Dante says, I'm totally biased, but I graduated the online year-long certificate program like a month ago and it was wicked. Wicked is good. So hope you'll join us. I think we're going to sign off soon, you guys, if I don't find more questions. Did I miss any, Barry?
I've got a question.
Great. Hi, Eden, please.
Hello. It's about, would you recommend, I'm thinking about signing up for the year-long course and then taking the graphic novel course after next year.
I think that's a good system. We're sort of setting it up for that to be a natural progression. I'd be happy to answer any more specific questions via email or chat or anything, but that's the progression we're sort of seeing as natural, where people build up the skills for 9 months or a year, more like 9 months, and then have the sort of like confidence and preparation to like launch into something a little longer. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, because like I'm just eager to make comics, and I've been working on things, but they're all it's just all like in a scribble stage, and I'm just kind of struggling bringing it all together.
I mean, I think that's who we serve best is the people sort of like they're here and they don't know how to get to here.
Yeah.
So that sounds fine. Michael is nodding again. So I guess Michael says, yes, that's true. Yeah, I'd be honored to answer some questions. You can send them via the message app on our website, or you can email me directly. But that's our job, you know. I mean, I think that's what, or at least I and Emma and our teachers try to do, which is get you to that next stage that you're trying to get at. And sometimes some part of that is recognizing where you are a little more clearly, but a lot of times it's just building up skills and confidence. And confidence comes out of repetition. It comes out of community. It comes out of a lot of things, you know. Yeah, that's our goal.
Because I've been kind of doing it on my own, so you know, just hoping that doing it with people will be easier. Or
I think so. I mean, that's sort of been my big revelation this year too, which is that I like being in a group of people doing things, and I didn't realize it as much. And again, I think it's the pandemic that forced me to learn that again, that having a community of people both creating but also responding to each other's work is really, I mean, beyond valuable. It's essential. And Michael had his hand up. Is that in response to, or is that a new question?
Well, sort of in response, because it's a theme that I keep hearing. Recently, I heard somebody say they wanted to sign up for the intensive because it was now or never. And then I hear people, they're not ready. But that's exactly how I felt. In fact, I don't know if you remember, Tom. I was like, are you sure? I'm not really sure.
I remember.
The right time. And I think that wherever you are is the right time. And what I learned from doing the intensive was that the only way to get better is to do and to keep doing. And what I found was just to echo what you said, Tom, was a community I didn't even know I was looking for until I found it. You know, guidance from people like you and Emma and Beth, and accountability. And just like the Wednesday night thing that we started, that was because I needed to do work in real time with a group of people. And I found other people who also wanted to do work in real time in a group. And we started with the Linda Barry book. I hope eventually to move to the Jessica Abel books. But I just say that, you know, the time is now. I wasn't ready, and I got so much out of it. Glad you talked me into it.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Eden,
sorry.
I just want to make sure Eden has been properly answered. Does that help?
Yeah, it really does.
Okay, feel free to email, because questions like that about that program, which is a big commitment, I can certainly answer in email or chat or whatever. Be happy to answer more. And I can put you in touch with some of the people who've just gone through it. Like Dante seems really eager to share their love for it as well. Sorry. So there was another hand up. Is it? I see Randall. You can go ahead.
I was just going to say something. When Barry was talking, my first image was it's the giant Grateful Dead concert. Everybody comes together to have a lot of fun. There's no real control over it. People just come and they have a great time, and it evolves. Every time it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we don't know why, but it just does, because people are drawn together, you know. So anyway, that was just my take on what Barry was talking about. It's just one giant Grateful Dead concert, and everybody's having fun.
Do the cops break it up at the end every time?
Not yet.
Good.
Very satisfying. I want to answer one that's in the chat. Z says, it was wonderful to hear more about process and creativity. I'm wondering at what point in your process you consider audience, if ever, when creating work, especially the personal memoir work. Did you create, revise with intended audience in mind? Thanks. I could probably give another whole talk on that. I'm tired, and I don't think anyone wants to hear me talk, and I don't want to give it now anyway. But I mean, the reason I say that is because it's a really important question, and I've had to navigate it a lot. I'm personally feel stronger when I can not think about my audience too much. I think my worst work and my worst years were when I was trying to when I was living in New York City and trying to fit into sort of a certain kind of publishing zeitgeist that was happening at the time. That said, although I did some good work for my comic strip, which I was trying to get actively published, and I was trying to consider my audience a lot. So I did some good work too during that. With the memoir, it was different because the memoir was so incredibly raw and personal. But it was very, very, very important to consider the audience. And there was a point in the early part of making it where I realized I wanted to draw the worst parts of the story because I wanted to make people suffer. And then I realized what a terrible idea that was, and how horrible that sounded, and how it wouldn't serve me and it wouldn't serve the audience. And so at that point I realized, like, okay, this is a book for an audience, but it's also mostly a book for me. And I just sort of had to get myself and the idea of an audience sort of aligned. I made a book I would want to read as an audience, I think. So I hope that answers that question. Thanks for asking it. We take more questions. I'm just scrolling up the chat, but every time there's a new thing that gets posted, it moves things. Okay, we answered Jim's question. We answered Charlie's question. Anybody else? Okay, well,
we should make Jeff ask his question.
Jeff's got a question?
Yes. No, I was curious. I hope that I didn't miss it. I listened to 90% of what you said, but I had to run off and help put my kids to bed really quick. Have you ever had a project where you were so personally invested in it, or you were so focused on it or it was so important to you that you had a hard time finishing it because you constantly redid it or constantly reworked it, or it just was never right, but you couldn't let it go? Like, have you ever dealt with that? And if you have, like, how did you get it done, or did you just move on to something else that was less? Because because let's put it this way, I have several projects that are fun, and I when I work on them, it's effortless, and I just, just get it out. And then there's this one project that I'm working on, and I've literally put everything that I can conceive into it, and I'm having a hell of it. I've redone it so many times. My one friend who works in comics told me that I should just make a book of the first page, and it should just be 60 pages of the first page.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that's where I'm thinking about doing the graphic novel course, because I feel like it'll push me to just take a different angle on that. And so I guess that's why I'm kind of like what you've obviously worked on a ton of stuff. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, yeah, well, we'll definitely force you to get past page 1. It reminds me of the character in Hicksville. I don't know if you've ever read Hicksville by Dylan Horrocks, but there's a bunch of plots in it. There's a couple of main ones, but there's this subplot, which doesn't really go anywhere, about this character working on his graphic novel. And it's always changing, and he's always in the middle of the beginning of it, kind of. And they're like, what's it about now? And he's like, oh, it's really changed now. And it's just like, I can't remember much about it. I should look for it and see if I can buy a PDF of it or something. But it's just never ending. And it also is clearly never going to get finished. That idea that you just said about throwing everything into it, I definitely feel that hard. And I think a lot of people do, where they really want to you just want to express all this stuff, right? That you like think and feel, and you just want to sort of combine it into this like ball of energy and send it out there. And, but it keeps growing and growing and growing, and you lose control of it. And then you can't even get near it. That has happened to me often. I've got abandoned projects. I even was going to show a little bit of one. I've got abandoned ideas, way more of those than I wish I had. Like, oh, I'm never clearly going to do that story. The bee is dying stuff that I showed at the end started with I was working on another memoir, a second memoir, which wasn't a great idea anyway. And I knew it. That seemed to be the next thing I wanted to do. And I was throwing in so many ideas that the outline itself, and I just mean like things that happen, the outline itself was 28 pages long. And that's clearly would have been a 500-page book or something, of just a little bit of nothing and a lot of everything. And so a friend who had a website asked me if I had any comic strip ideas. And I took one thing on page 28, maybe 27. And it was like, so-and-so is on the ground dying and ranting. And I just took that and I said, yes, I've got something for a comic strip. And I left everything else in the outline behind. I said, forget it. I'm just like going to ignore it. And I'm just going to focus on the thing that seems most alive at this moment. And I did that. And it's been running for I've been working with it for 3 or 4 years really happily. And the weird thing is that lately I've been noticing the desire to put little things that I know are sort of lurking in that outline, maybe into some of these stories. I don't know if it'll happen, but I've gotten a couple of notes where I'm like, oh, that's from that outline. Isn't that interesting? Because it popped up again. But like Barry was asking, I embraced pretty hard not believing I have all the answers, and especially not believing I have all the answers before I start writing and drawing, like if I conceive of something ahead of time, it's just not a great idea. And I also know, but I also know energetically, it's just impossible for me to follow up on that. Your sort of writer brain and your drawing brain, they need to collaborate well. They need to sort of have this symbiotic relationship. And if the sort of like the person that conceives of things is just going to hand it off to the writer, to the artist, the odds are the artist isn't ready for that, doesn't want it, all sorts of things. They're like, hand it off to somebody else that you can pay maybe to draw it. But the visual, at least my visual self wants to be part of the process, to be part of the the conception and part of the language building and part of the design and everything, not just like this hired hand. So I don't know if that helps answer the question a little. But I've got tons of abandoned projects, yeah. And you said something also in there. You said like, you know, you work on these little projects that are effortless, and this other one is really lingering. The one lucky thing for me is nothing is effortless. So I don't have anything like that. Like even the things that look like they're tossed off take way too much labor. So I'm too involved with those projects to.
And that's what I thought, that maybe the kind of shelving it and then focusing on something that seemed more attainable would be the answer. But it's like, and I don't know what that is, because like for writing, I feel very confident about that. Like, and so like the stuff that I come up with, like I would read it, and that's all that's really important to me. But this other piece, it's like an autobiographical metaphor with all this like hyper emotional stuff in it. And so in my mind, it has to be like, it has to drip off the pages, the emotion. And I'm like sitting there and drawing it. I'm like, it's not dripping, the emotion's not dripping. So then I like scrap it and redo it. And then it's just like my wife, the couple of friends that are artists that I share this with, like they're at the point now where they're like, stop sending me this. Like you have any, like I sent the one to the other day. I sent one to my friend the other day, and he was like, Jeff, do you have Asperger's? Like, are you on the spectrum? Are you like you're like, you seem like someone that would make a clay pony like 500 times in a row. Mm-hmm. And you know, and I at the time you know, and I didn't take offense to that, because he knows that both my children have autism, by the way. You know, so your suggestions and thoughts on it do definitely help. Like I've got to move past it and just get it done.
Yeah, well, you know, sometimes the answer actually is to force it through in a really small time frame. Say, okay, I know this is a 6-year project. I'm going to do it in a month and see what happens. Worst case scenario, you lose a month of creative time, but you don't lose
anyway. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and then you have a new handle on it, and then it's, first of all, it's going to be this like new weird alive thing that you didn't predict. It's going to have some of the original goo that you've been working with the whole time. Parts of it'll drip as you wish. But then it'll give you a new understanding of like, oh, okay, I see how I could handle this if I wanted to put some different energy into it. And then maybe after taking a long break, you can sort of reassess a plan and sort of come up with a new way of dealing with it. But what you just described is exactly what happened with this 28-page outline, that I realized like it was just, I wasn't even having fun starting it. And then, so I just took the part. It was exciting.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part of it when you get into something like that, is that it should be really joyous and, you know, kind of, and instead it's this like just excruciating, like you get to the point where you don't even like working on it anymore.
Yeah, you don't want to be there at all.
Yeah, so, okay. Well, thank you very much. That was very, very helpful.
Oh, thanks. And Beth says she did a complete draft of her book in 6 weeks on 3x5 cards. Wow, I forgot. I mean, I knew that that's cool. And Beth could definitely go into more about how that has evolved over time, because she's been working on it for 3 years now or something like that. And then it says that was after about a year of progress, but not getting focused. Beth, you should just come in. Since then, I've been working for a few years, but that first complete draft energized me through. Cool.
It was a huge thing. And I'm a novelist. So, you know, I've got experience creating and carrying through long projects and longer stories, but I didn't know how to do it in comics. And so I'd been working on it a little bit over a year before I decided I had to do exactly what you were just talking about. I had to do a complete draft from start to finish as fast as I could. And so I did it. So it was 1 page per 3x5 card. And I just said, I can use stick figures, it doesn't matter. And but I gotta get this thing in my head. I've got to see it to the end. And that It's completely different now, of course, because I've revised it 2 or 3 other times, and that's okay. But it was, I had it, I could hold it in my hand. I actually printed those 3x5 cards and had them bound on purpose so I could hold that sucker in my hand. And that really did give me what I needed to power through it. Yeah. So there's a lot to that idea of doing a really fast draft, I think.
That's great advice, Beth. Thanks. I forgot that the tangibility aspect of it is really important too. Like having that thing, like this is a version of the thing, right? You know, and yeah, that's great. Cool. I think there was another question. Susan Mark says, it's interesting how our processes are different, but right for each of them. Yeah, I was going to mention that we all sort of have to sort of search for our processes, but we have lots of people to ask about. I'm losing track of the chat. If anyone's got a question that's in the chat and isn't getting answered, feel free. Let's see. Sean is talking about Hicksville. If you remember the name of that character, Sean, let me know. I can't remember what it is. Michael Ashner is bringing up Krapp's Last Tape. What are you bringing up Krapp's Last Tape for? You said Krupps, but it's Krapp. I know that play really well.
Oh, because we were talking about, you were talking about that comic about the comic artist who could never finish.
Oh.
Reminded me of Krapp's Last Tape.
Uh-huh. Let's see. Publishing, craft insert. Aman has a question. Hey, is Aman? I didn't realize Aman was here. Hi, Aman. I hope we haven't lost him because I know time is different over there.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Aman. Do you want to just ask your question or should I repeat what you've got in the chat?
Yeah, the question was around, SAW has been great. I was in the year-long program for those who don't know me. And I started as a newbie, same as some of the other topics we're talking about, like Tom helped me make up my mind that this is the right time, anytime is the right time. And at the end of the year-long program, I'm thinking what next, what do I keep doing and how do I get stuff out there? So that's where I was curious about what do we do with the work? How do we get to an audience? I know there are self-publishing options, there are book publishing options. Tom just talked through so many books that he's gotten published. So how do we navigate that space? And then I had responses, Tom, because I was also curious about the survey that came out.
Right. Yeah, I saw that yeah, okay. It wasn't exactly a question. You were just commenting that Barry and Mariah have been working on collating some responses about publishing and sharing and things like that. Yeah, that's definitely worth checking into. And
so will that take the form of a course that's offered, or what shape will that be?
What's the question? I'm not sure about.
Like if Maria, if you're here, or Barry, like what will this turn out to be, this focus on publishing?
Yeah, I'm still here. The group, the planning team just is getting started, but we have 2 main ideas. One would be a series of Zoom online programs, an evening program perhaps, or Saturday, Sunday, about some particular aspect of publishing. And the other idea is an online resource, like a web landing page that lists markets that specifically, focus on, accept work from cartoonists, whether book length or for contests or for literary journals, just a smaller piece, whatever it is. You can find those things if you Google search, but then it's up to each of us to do that on our own. So we're trying to consolidate things in one place for us. But anyway, it's early, so nothing is going to happen soon because the planning team just had our kickoff meeting this week. And we welcome other members if anybody else would like to join us. But those are some of the things we have in mind.
Cool, and that'll be in the community, so it's easy to find some info about that. And Barry or Mariah, either of you can help me focus that more in the community forum if you like. We can set up a topic or make sure it gets highlighted or something like that. Okay. Cool. If there's no, Sean is looking for the one character in Hicksville, and then if there's no other questions, we'll just sign off. I really appreciate, again, everybody being here, and I appreciate you letting me jump in on a pro call. I realized since we've started doing them, which was actually about a year ago, I hadn't really done one. I mean, it's okay, I don't need to do them that often, but I did realize that a lot of people hadn't maybe heard some of that story, and maybe it's of interest. Oh, Sean can't find it. Really? I know that character's all throughout it, but it's only like everyone, like 2 panels here, 2 panels there. You'll find it. You can send me an email when you remember it. Yeah, again, really thanks to everybody, and let us know how we can help you make comics better, but more importantly, like keep that creative self in you alive and spirited, you know, happy and energized and things like that. And because I just think it's one way to save the world, frankly. Okay, I'm gonna sign off if nobody else is gonna ask a question. Yeah, okay, just a lot of hand waves and stuff like that. Oh yeah, it might be Coop, that's right. I don't know if it's Coupe or Coop, but yeah, that's right, Sean, thanks.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, everybody. And I'll see you in the group or wherever. And really, really, really thanks for being here. It's really been a pleasure.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.